At 35, you are still alone. New Year's Eve must be absolutely pathetic for you. My sister Vanessa smirked, her voice slicing through the clinking of crystal champagne flutes in her $4 million living room. I slowly set my wine glass on the marble coaster, meeting her gaze with a deadpan smile. You can save your fake pity, Vanessa. I have actually been married for 3 years to a man who could buy this entire zip code. The lavish party around us instantly flatlined into a suffocating silence as my mother froze with her cocktail halfway to her mouth. Then the laughter started. It was not a polite chuckle but a loud, obnoxious roar led by my arrogant white brother-in-law, Brad. He slapped his knee and leaned back in his leather chair, wiping a tear of amusement from his eye. "Oh my God, Zora! That is the most desperate thing I have ever heard," he gasped. "You created an imaginary husband just so you would not look like a complete loser at our party." My mother Eleanor quickly recovered from her initial shock and joined the cruelty. She crossed her arms, her designer jewelry clanking together. "Stop making a fool of yourself, Zora," she sneered, stepping closer to me. "If you have a husband, then where is the ring? Where are the pictures? Pull out your phone right now and show us this mysterious billionaire. You have always been a compulsive liar ever since you were a little girl, making up stories because you could never compete with your sister." I kept my hands neatly folded in my lap, refusing to reach for my phone. I do not need to prove anything to people who only invite me around to feel better about their own miserable lives. I replied, my voice steady and icy. Brad scoffed, taking a large gulp of his drink. "Right. Because he goes to another school, does he not? Let me guess, he is a top-secret agent who cannot be photographed. Listen to me, Zora, it is okay to be a broke single black woman. Not everyone gets to live the American dream like Vanessa and me. But lying to our faces in our own home is just sad. My name is Zora, and I am 35 years old. I work as a private wealth and luxury real estate manager. For my entire life, my mother and sister treated me like a worthless scapegoat, while praising Vanessa as the golden child who married a wealthy tech genius. But what they did not know was that the man they were laughing at was very real, and he was currently on his way to this exact house. Before I tell you how I utterly destroyed their fake perfect lives tonight, let me know where you are watching this video from in the comments below. Hit subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against toxic family members. Now let us get back to the worst New Year's Eve of their lives. Vanessa strutted over to me, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "You are embarrassing yourself, and you are embarrassing this family," she hissed. "Mom is right. You see my massive house, my successful husband, my perfect life, and it drives you insane. So you invent a fake marriage to cope." I picked up my wine glass again and took a slow, deliberate sip. "Your perfect life is a house of cards, Vanessa, and it is going to collapse a lot sooner than you think." Eleanor slammed her hand down on the side table. "Do not you dare speak to your sister that way," she shouted, her face turning red. "She was gracious enough to invite you into her beautiful home, and this is how you repay her. You are nothing but a bitter, jealous spinster, Zora. You will die alone because no man of value would ever put up with your terrible attitude." Brad chuckled, wrapping his arm around Vanessa. "Let her be crazy, Eleanor. She is just mad because she knows she will be renting a tiny apartment forever while we build an empire. Honestly, Zora, just sit quietly in the corner and try not to scare our normal guests away with your sad delusions." I smiled, taking another sip of my drink, allowing the expensive vintage to coat my throat before answering him. "I am not going anywhere, Brad. In fact, the night is just getting started for us, and I promise you that by the time this party is over, you will be the one begging me for mercy." He rolled his eyes, letting out a heavy sigh, completely unaware of the absolute destruction that was about to walk through his custom front door. Eleanor scoffed, waving her hand in the air. "You are a fool, Zora. It is pathetic how you invent delusions to cope with reality. You have always lied to make yourself sound important." I shifted my weight, looking directly into my mother's cold eyes. Is that so, Eleanor? Tell me exactly what I have lied about. Eleanor stood next to Vanessa. How about your senior year of high school? Do you remember that, Zora? You told the entire family you got accepted into Columbia University. You even bought a sweater with the logo. Then August rolled around and you quietly packed your bags and went to a cheap state school. You humiliated us. You were so desperate for attention that you fabricated an Ivy League acceptance just to steal the spotlight from your sister's engagement party. The room grew quiet. Brad let out a loud snort, shaking his head. Wow. Brad chuckled loudly. I did not know that crazy story. That is some serious psychological damage, Zora. Faking an acceptance. No wonder you are faking a billionaire husband tonight. You really need professional help. Vanessa smirked. See, everyone. She is unwell. We invite her out of pity, but it was a mistake. She is completely toxic. I did not flinch. I set my glass down and took a slow step toward my mother. My cold stare made Eleanor take a step back. I did get into Columbia, I said, my voice dropping to a low tone that commanded the attention of every person in the room. I got the acceptance letter in March. I had the scholarship offers, but I could not go. Do you want to tell these guests why I could not go, Eleanor? My mother's face lost its arrogant color. I do not know what you are talking about, she stammered. You did not go because you were not smart enough. You failed your final exams. That is a fascinating revision of history, I replied. Let us talk about the truth. Let us talk about the $80,000 college trust fund that Grandpa left exclusively in my name. The trust fund you had legal guardianship over until I turned 18. I went to the bank the day after my 18th birthday to pay my first semester tuition at Columbia, but the account was empty. Was it not, Mother? Eleanor swallowed hard but said nothing. Tell them, I demanded, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Tell your wealthy friends and your perfect son-in-law where my tuition money went. Stop it, Vanessa hissed, stepping in front of Eleanor. You are making things up again. You are ruining my New Year's Eve party with your insane lies. I turned my gaze to Vanessa. I am not making up anything. Mother drained my entire college fund to pay off your massive credit card debt. You maxed out 6 cards trying to keep up with the wealthy girls in your sorority. You bought designer bags, luxury shoes, and a first-class ticket to Paris. Debt collectors were threatening to sue you for fraud. So Mother stole my future to save yours. That is a lie. Vanessa screamed, her face turning a blotchy shade of red. Mom would never do that. You are just jealous of my life. It is not a lie, I said, reaching into my clutch. I do not make accusations without receipts. I pulled out a folded bank statement and held it up. This is the withdrawal record from my trust account signed by Eleanor, dated exactly 3 days before Vanessa's debt lawsuits were settled out of court. I also have the police report I filed when I realized the money was gone. But I dropped the charges because Mother begged me on her knees, crying that Vanessa would go to jail if I told the truth. Do you remember crying on my bedroom floor, Mother? The silence in the room was deafening. Even Brad stopped smiling. He looked at Vanessa and then at Eleanor, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face. You are a monster? Zora! Eleanor choked out, her hands trembling. How dare you bring family business into public like this? How dare you try to ruin your sister's special night? You are a bitter child. I am simply matching your energy, Mother, I replied calmly. You wanted to talk about my past lies. I just wanted to correct the record. I went to a state school, worked 3 jobs, and graduated top of my class while you two spent my inheritance. And yet here I stand today while you are still playing pretend. Get out! Vanessa shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the heavy front door. Get out of my beautiful house right now. I am so very serious about this, Zora. Before I even had a chance to respond, Brad stepped in between us. He puffed out his chest, standing tall in his custom suit, trying to play the noble white savior, protecting his fragile wife. All right, that is enough, he barked, holding up his hands. You come into our home, drink our expensive wine, and disrespect my family. You are out of line, Zora. If you want to stay here, you need to pay your way. I tilted my head. Pay my way. What exactly are you talking about, Brad? He let out a condescending laugh, making sure the guests were watching. I am talking about the fact that you have been freeloading off us for years. We hired a Michelin star chef for tonight. We have beluga caviar and flowing champagne. This party cost over $80,000. You walked in empty-handed and started causing drama. So if you want to stand on my marble floors, you can pay your fair share. I want $10,000 transferred to my account right now. Vanessa crossed her arms and nodded vigorously. Yes, you owe us. Pay up or get out. You want me to wire you $10,000 right this second, I repeated slowly. Brad smirked, pulling his expensive phone out. Do you need me to spell out my account number? Or is that too much money for a glorified assistant to scrape together? Maybe your imaginary billionaire husband can wire it. Oh wait, he does not exist. Eleanor sighed, shaking her head dramatically. Do not humiliate her any further, Brad. Just call security and have her escorted out. She is ruining the evening. I calmly unclasped my designer clutch. I reached inside and pulled out a crisp white piece of paper, unfolding it slowly. You are right about one thing, Brad, I said, my voice carrying clearly. This party was very expensive. The catering alone was exactly $42,500. I know this because Chef Antoine called me at 9 o'clock this morning in an absolute panic. Brad's smug smile faltered. His eyes darted to the paper. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice losing its confidence. Chef Antoine called me, I continued, because your platinum credit card was declined. Not just once, but 3 times. He tried 2 other cards under your name, and they were both rejected for insufficient funds. He was packing up his trucks, ready to cancel the entire menu, leaving you with empty silver platters for your high society guests. That is a lie, Brad snapped, flushing red. It was a bank error. My accounts are perfectly fine. If it was a simple bank error, why did you ignore the catering company when they called you 5 times, I asked. You two were hiding because the money was not there. Chef Antoine only had my number because I recommended him to you. He called me terrified that his business would take a loss, so I cleaned up your mess. I held the paper up higher so the guests could see. This is the finalized invoice from the catering company, paid in full. By me. I authorized the $42,500 charge on my personal black card this morning, so your little illusion would not fall apart. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Guests exchanged wide-eyed glances. The image of the wealthy tech CEO was cracking right in front of them. Vanessa snatched the paper, scanning the undeniable payment confirmation. Her jaw dropped. Brad, what is this? She trembled. Why was your card declined? You told me the Vanguard advance came through last week. Brad snatched the paper back, crumpling it. It is none of her business, he hissed, sweating visibly. It is just a temporary cash flow issue. I have millions tied up in assets. You do not understand corporate finance, Vanessa. And you, Zora, had no right to interfere with my vendors. I interfered to save you from social humiliation, I replied smoothly. So tell me, Brad, since I already paid the $42,000 catering bill, do you still want me to wire you $10,000 for my share? Or should we deduct it from the debt you owe me? Eleanor looked frantically between Brad and me. Brad, do not tell me you are having money problems, she whispered. I am fine, Brad roared, making Eleanor jump. It is a minor liquidity issue. Next week I am closing a $50 million deal. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You think paying a catering bill makes you special, Zora. You are still nothing compared to what I am building. You will always be a pathetic loser in my eyes. Brad took a deep breath, smoothing the lapels of his custom suit. He turned his back to me and raised his empty glass to the room, plastering a fake smile on his face to salvage his damaged pride. Let us focus on the future, he announced, his voice booming over the soft jazz playing in the background. Next week, my startup is officially closing a $50 million Series B funding round. The guests let out a collective murmur of impressed gasps. Vanessa immediately perked up, clapping her hands together with a triumphant smile. That is right, Brad continued, pacing slightly as if he were giving a presentation in his living room. Vanguard Holdings, the most prestigious venture capital firm on the East Coast, is leading the round. They see my absolute vision. They know that my tech company is about to revolutionize the industry. I am building a legacy here. We are talking about generational wealth. He paused, letting the heavy words hang in the air before turning his attention back to me. His eyes were cold, but his tone was mockingly gentle. He was playing the benevolent king. And because I am a good man, Zora, and because we are family, I am willing to overlook your little stunt tonight. In fact, I am going to offer you a lifeline. Brad took a step closer, looking down at me. My company is expanding rapidly. We are moving into a massive new office space downtown. I need a new receptionist to handle the front desk. The pay is basically minimum wage, but it comes with health insurance. Eleanor beamed from the sidelines, clapping her hands. "Oh, Brad, that is so generous of you," she gushed. "Zora, you should thank him right now. You have been struggling for so long." Brad held up a hand, stopping my mother. "It is the least I can do, Eleanor. Single broke women need a safety net, especially at her age. She cannot keep pretending to have a billionaire husband forever. Eventually, reality has to set in. She needs a steady paycheck and a quiet place to sit and answer phones while the real adults do business." Vanessa giggled, taking a sip of her champagne. "You would look great in a little headset, Zora. Just do not mess up his coffee orders." I looked at the three of them. I did not yell. I did not throw my drink in his face. Instead, I let out a soft, genuine laugh. The sound echoed in the tense room, catching Brad completely off guard. "A receptionist," I repeated, swirling the dark red wine in my glass. "That is a very kind offer, Brad, but I do have a few questions about the company before I sign on to answer your phones." Brad puffed his chest out. "Go ahead. Ask away. But try to keep it simple. I do not want to confuse you with high-level corporate strategy." I smiled, leaning forward slightly. "Well, since Vanguard Holdings is allegedly injecting $50 million into your platform, I am curious about your current cash burn rate. Specifically, how are you justifying that valuation when your customer acquisition cost has tripled in the last 2 quarters, while your user retention has plummeted by 40%? Brad froze. The smug smile instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a look of sheer panic. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I did not stop. I took a step toward him, my voice ringing clear and authoritative. "And since we are talking about your big Series B round, what exactly did Vanguard say about your outstanding liabilities? Because from what I understand, your software architecture is outdated, and you are burning through $600,000 a month just to keep the servers from crashing. If you are entirely out of cash today, how do you plan to make payroll on Friday before this mythical Vanguard money clears?" The silence returned to the room, but this time it was suffocating. The guests who were just cheering for his success were now staring at him with deep suspicion. "How do you—" Brad stammered, his face draining of color. "How do you know those words? You are just a glorified assistant." I tilted my head. "I manage private wealth, Brad. I read financial portfolios for breakfast. So tell me, am I wrong? Are you not burning through cash while lying to your investors about your daily active users?" Brad swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "That is confidential corporate information?" He snapped, his voice cracking slightly. "You do not know what you are talking about. You are throwing around buzzwords you read on the internet to sound smart. My company is completely solid." Vanessa rushed to his side, grabbing his arm. "Tell her, Brad," she demanded, looking frantically at her husband. "Tell her she is crazy." Brad yanked his arm away from his wife, his breathing heavy. "Shut up, Vanessa," he hissed, losing his carefully crafted composure. "Do not let her get into your head. She is a nobody. She is just trying to sabotage us because she has absolutely nothing going for her." He turned back to the crowd, forcing a rigid smile. "Please, everyone, enjoy the champagne. My business is flawless. I guarantee it. Do not listen to a bitter woman who does not even have a date for New Year's Eve." Eleanor marched forward, placing a protective hand on Brad's shoulder. Her face was contorted with absolute disgust as she looked at me. "How dare you, Zora?" she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "How dare you come into this beautiful home and try to tear down a successful white man who actually provides for your sister? Brad has given Vanessa everything she could ever dream of. He bought this $4 million mansion. He drives a Porsche. He is building a tech empire from the ground up. He is the kind of man you could only ever hope to catch a glimpse of from the sidewalk. And instead of being proud of your family, you are standing here trying to ruin his reputation with your petty jealousy." I looked at my mother, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. "Mother, he just lied to all your friends. I just proved he could not even afford the appetizers you are eating. Why are you defending him?" "Because he is a winner," Eleanor shouted, silencing the room. "And you are a loser. You have always been a loser, Zora. You spend your days crunching numbers for rich people, pretending you belong in their world. But you do not. You are just the help. You sit in your lonely little apartment reading financial blogs, and you build up this twisted fantasy that you are somehow smarter than a brilliant CEO. Vanessa stepped up next to our mother, crossing her arms with a smug smile. "It is honestly pathetic, Mom. She is so obsessed with my life. She is probably the one who hacked Brad's credit cards just to make him look bad in front of the caterer." Brad nodded eagerly, seizing the excuse Vanessa just handed him. "Exactly. That is exactly what happened. She probably stole my banking info when she used the bathroom. It is a classic jealousy tactic." I stared at the three of them, marveling at their sheer capacity for delusion. "You would rather believe I committed wire fraud than admit your perfect son-in-law is broke?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with disbelief. Eleanor took another step toward me. Her eyes narrowed into angry slits. "I believe that you are a disappointment to the family name. You have been a stain on this family since the day you were born. You never fit in. You never learned how to carry yourself with grace. You just walk around with this arrogant chip on your shoulder like the world owes you something. Look at Vanessa. She is elegant. She married well. She understands how society works. She knows how to support a powerful man. What do? You show up here alone, making up ridiculous lies about a billionaire husband who does not exist. You are 35 years old, Zora. It is humiliating. You are not just a liar, Zora." My mother continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "You are a toxic poison. I gave you everything. I put a roof over your head, and this is how you repay my love. By trying to destroy my daughter's happiness on New Year's Eve." I stood my ground, firmly holding my designer clutch tightly. "You gave me nothing, Mother. You stole my college fund, and you spent my entire childhood telling me I was not good enough." "That is it!" Eleanor screamed, her face flushing dark red. "I am done with you. I am officially done playing this game. You are no longer my daughter. I do not ever want to see your face at another family gathering. Get out of this house," she commanded. "Get out right now and go back to your miserable, lonely life. Do not ever contact us again." Vanessa smiled brightly, leaning into Brad's side. "Bye, Zora. Try not to cry in the Uber on your way home." I simply kept my eyes locked on Eleanor, watching the absolute hatred burning in her gaze. She took a deep breath, ready to yell for the security guards to physically drag me out of the living room. But before she could open her mouth, a heavy sound echoed through the foyer. The massive oak front doors suddenly swung wide open, hitting the wall with a loud thud. The cold winter wind swept into the grand entryway, carrying with it an immediate shift in the atmosphere. Every single head in the living room snapped toward the foyer. The sound of heavy, confident footsteps echoed against the marble floor. Someone had just walked right past the valet and the security team. The party music seemed to fade into the background as the imposing figure stepped out of the shadows of the hallway and directly into the bright light of the large living room. The man standing in the archway commanded the attention of every single person present. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that fit perfectly. The dark fabric contrasted with his crisp white shirt, and the subtle gleam of a platinum watch caught the light. He carried himself with the effortless authority that comes from possessing immense power. He did not look around with curiosity. Instead, his dark, piercing eyes scanned the crowd before locking directly onto me. A warm, genuine smile broke across his handsome face, softening his striking features. The entire room went dead silent. The soft jazz playing from hidden speakers suddenly felt too loud against the absolute quiet. Nobody moved. The waiters froze with silver trays in hand. Eleanor stood paralyzed, her mouth slightly open, unable to process the imposing figure in her daughter's foyer. Brad took a physical step backward, his drink trembling in his grasp. The aggressive alpha male persona he had projected all night evaporated in the presence of a man who naturally dominated the space. I did not wait for my family to recover from their shock. I turned my back on my mother, leaving her silent threats hanging in the cold air, and walked slowly across the marble floor. My heels clicked steadily against the stone. When I reached him, he pulled me into a firm embrace. He kissed me softly on the cheek, his hand resting protectively on my lower back. "I am sorry I am late," he whispered, his deep, smooth voice easily carrying across the tense room. "My last meeting ran over. I hope I did not miss the toast." "You arrived at the perfect time," I replied, smiling up at him. I turned to face the crowd, keeping my arm wrapped around his waist. I looked directly at my mother, whose face had drained of all color. "Everyone," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I would like you to meet my husband, Marcus." For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody breathed. The wealthy guests simply stared, trying to comprehend how the woman they had just been mocking was now standing next to a man who looked like he owned the entire city. Then Vanessa broke the silence. She let out a loud, sharp bark of laughter. It was an ugly, desperate sound that shattered the quiet. She threw her head back, clapping her hands together as if she had just heard the funniest joke in the world. "Oh my God," she gasped, pointing a manicured finger at us. "Zora, you actually did it. You went out and hired an actor." The tension in the room shifted. Guests murmured nervously to each other, unsure of how to react. Brad let out a loud breath of relief, running a hand through his hair. He pasted his smug smile back on his face and stepped forward. "Wow," Brad chuckled, shaking his head. "I have to admit, Zora, I am impressed. You were so desperate to save face tonight that you actually paid a guy to put on a rented tuxedo and walk in here pretending to be your husband. What did you do? Did you find him on an escort website? How much does a fake husband cost by the hour these days?" Vanessa walked up to stand next to Brad, looking Marcus up and down with obvious contempt. "He is very handsome. I will give you that," she sneered. "Good job on the casting, Zora. But this is just sad. You cannot just bring a gigolo to my New Year's Eve party and expect us to believe he is a billionaire. Real wealthy men do not walk in uninvited to save a miserable spinster from embarrassment." Eleanor finally found her voice, stepping forward with her arms crossed defensively. "Zora, this is the final straw," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "Bringing a hired stranger into Vanessa's home is a massive security risk. We have expensive things here. I want him out." I felt Marcus shift slightly beside me. He did not look angry. In fact, he looked incredibly amused. He gently squeezed my hip, looking down at me with a soft smile. "Are these the lovely family members you have told me so much about?" he asked, his voice perfectly calm and completely unbothered by their insults. "Yes," I nodded, sighing softly. "They are very protective of their imaginary wealth." Marcus chuckled, a deep, rich sound that made Brad bristle. "Well then," Marcus said, turning his attention to Brad. "I suppose I should introduce myself properly." Brad crossed his arms, puffing his chest out in an aggressive stance, trying desperately to match the natural intimidation of the man standing before him. "Go ahead, buddy," Brad sneered very loudly. "Tell us your fake name." Marcus did not flinch. He reached out a hand. "My name is Marcus," he said simply, offering a polite smile. It is a pleasure to finally meet you, Brad. Zora has shared quite a few interesting stories about your business ventures. Brad ignored the outstretched hand. He kept his arms firmly crossed, looking Marcus up and down with an exaggerated expression of pity. Marcus what? He demanded loudly. Just Marcus, like some cheap nightclub promoter. Let me guess you do not want to give us your last name because you have a warrant out for unpaid parking tickets. Or maybe you are dodging child support. Vanessa giggled, leaning against the marble kitchen island. She picked up her champagne flute, taking a sip before joining in. Ask him what he does for a living. Brad, she urged, her voice dripping with malice. I bet he is a personal trainer or an aspiring DJ. Zora always had terrible taste in men. That is why she is 35 and completely broke. Marcus slowly lowered his hand, not looking offended in the slightest. He slipped his hands into the pockets of his tailored trousers. I work in finance, he replied, his voice smooth and understated. I manage investments. I help connect capital with promising opportunities. Brad threw his head back and let out a loud, barking laugh. Oh, I get it now, Brad shouted, pointing a finger at Marcus. You are one of those crypto bros. You sit in your tiny apartment day trading pennies on some app hoping to strike it rich. Or maybe you sell life insurance to your friends and call yourself an entrepreneur. Listen, buddy, managing your own checking account does not make you a financier. I stepped closer to Marcus, feeling a surge of anger, but he gently squeezed my hand to calm me. He was enjoying this. I assure you I do a bit more than day trading, Marcus said mildly. I focus primarily on the tech sector. I help startups get off the ground when they need funding. Brad's eyes lit up with arrogant glee. He saw this as the perfect opportunity to assert his dominance and educate the poor fake husband. He uncrossed his arms and took a step closer to Marcus, invading his personal space. Look, Marcus, since Zora dragged you into the big leagues tonight, let me give you some free advice. Brad began, his tone dripping with condescension. The tech sector is not a playground for amateur hustlers. You cannot just read a few blogs and call yourself an investor. It takes a certain level of elite intellect to sit at the table with the big boys. You have to understand market dynamics, user acquisition, and burn rates. Things that a guy renting a tuxedo simply cannot comprehend. Marcus tilted his head, feigning genuine interest. Is that right? It sounds like you have a lot of experience with high-level corporate strategy, Brad. Brad puffed out his chest, adjusting his tie. I do not just have experience, Marcus. I own the board. My company is about to close a $50 million Series B round with Vanguard Holdings. Vanguard. Let that sink in. They only deal with visionaries. They are trusting me with $50 million because I know how to scale a business, while guys like you are still trying to figure out how to pay your rent on time. The guests around us began to whisper among themselves, enjoying the free entertainment. A few of the men in expensive suits chuckled at Brad's jokes, clearly siding with the wealthy homeowner over the mysterious stranger. Brad fed on their energy. He paced back and forth in front of Marcus like a professor lecturing a failing student. Let me tell you another secret about wealth. Marcus Brad continued, waving his empty glass around. It is not just about the money. It is about the pedigree. You cannot fake pedigree. Look at the way you are standing. Look at that suit. You probably think it makes you look important, but to guys like me it just looks like a costume. True power does not need to announce itself. True power is walking into a room and knowing you own the building. You do not have that aura, buddy. You look like a guy hoping nobody asks him to pay the dinner bill. Marcus looked at Eleanor with a calm, piercing gaze before turning back to Brad. Well, Brad, I will certainly keep your advice in mind. It is always fascinating to hear how confident startup founders are right before the due diligence process exposes their actual financials. Brad's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he forced it back. There is nothing to expose, he snapped, his voice a little too defensive. My financials are bulletproof. You see, that is the difference between us. I operate with total transparency, and you are hiding behind vague answers. But tell you what, Marcus, I am a generous guy. Maybe if you clean up nice and drop the fake billionaire act, I can get you an entry-level sales job at my firm. You can make cold calls. Zora can answer the front desk phones. You two can keep the family employed. Vanessa clapped her hands together. Oh, Brad, you are so charitable. Do you hear that, Zora? Brad is offering your little escort a job. Marcus smiled a slow, dangerous smile that did not quite reach his eyes. That is a very tempting offer, Brad. But I think I will stick to my current role. I prefer being the one who signs the checks. Brad rolled his eyes, letting out a loud sigh. Whatever, man. Stay broke. Just do not ask me for a loan when you realize Zora cannot afford to pay your hourly rate anymore. Marcus did not let the insult faze him. Instead, he turned slightly and picked up a sleek black wooden box he had rested on the entryway console when he walked in. He held it out toward Brad with a polite smile. I actually brought a host gift, Marcus said. It is customary to bring something special to celebrate the new year. I hope you and Vanessa enjoy it. Brad snatched the box from Marcus with a loud scoff. He popped the metal latch and pulled out the dark glass bottle. He held it up to the light, squinting at the worn label. Brad let out an exaggerated groan. Oh, man, Brad said, shaking his head. What is this? The label looks like it was printed in a basement. I appreciate the effort, but we only serve high-end champagne here. I cannot serve my guests a dusty bottle of cheap table wine you picked up at a corner liquor store. Vanessa covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Just put it in the kitchen, Brad, she said dismissively. We can use it for cooking later, or maybe give it to the maid. Marcus kept his hands resting casually in his pockets. I would strongly advise against using that for cooking, Marcus replied, his voice smooth. That is a 1947 Cheval Blanc. It is considered one of the greatest wines ever produced. I acquired that specific bottle at an auction in Geneva. It cost exactly $20,000. The laughter in the room died instantly. A few guests who understood fine wine leaned in to get a better look at the bottle. One older gentleman in a tailored gray suit gasped audibly, whispering to his wife that Marcus was telling the absolute truth. Brad's smug expression faltered. He looked down at the bottle, then back up at Marcus, his face flushing pink. $20,000, Brad choked out, his voice losing its confident boom. You expect me to believe you spent $20,000 on fermented grape juice? You are completely full of it. You probably printed a fake label and slapped it on a cheap bottle just to look rich. Marcus smiled, a knowing look crossing his face. I do not need to fake anything, Brad. But speaking of fakes, that is a very interesting watch you are wearing. Brad puffed his chest back out, raising his left arm to display the heavy gold watch gleaming on his wrist. It was exactly the distraction he needed. Oh, this, Brad boasted, adjusting his cuff so the watch caught the light. This is a Rolex Daytona, solid gold. It cost me $45,000. I sat on a waiting list for 2 years to get the call from the dealer. It is a masterpiece of Swiss engineering, something you will never afford. Marcus took a slow step closer to Brad. He leaned in slightly, peering at the watch face. It is a beautiful design, Marcus agreed, his tone conversational. The Daytona is an iconic timepiece. However, the Swiss engineering you are bragging about is actually quite meticulous. For instance, Rolex uses a sweeping continuous movement for their second hand. It glides silently around the dial. But your second hand is ticking, Marcus said loudly. One harsh tick per second. That only happens with a cheap battery movement. Brad froze, holding his wrist in midair. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his voice cutting through the quiet room like a surgical blade. The lettering on the word Daytona is spaced unevenly, and the gold plating on the bottom clasp is already beginning to chip, revealing cheap steel underneath. I would say you paid about $200 for that on a street corner. The absolute silence was broken by the sound of muffled gasps and intense whispering from the wealthy guests. They were ruthless in their judgment. A tech CEO wearing a fake Rolex was the ultimate social suicide in this circle. Brad's face turned violently red. The color rushed up his neck and settled deep into his cheeks. He quickly yanked his arm down, pulling his jacket sleeve firmly over his wrist to hide the watch. "Shut up!" he hissed, sweat instantly breaking out on his forehead. "You do not know what you are talking about. This is a custom piece. You are just jealous." Vanessa looked horrified, staring at Brad's wrist and then at the whispering crowd. "Brad, what is he talking about?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "Tell them it is real. Show them the papers." "I do not need to prove anything to this clown." "Brad," shouted his voice, cracking with panic. He was losing control of the room. He was losing his audience. He was losing control of the room. He was losing his audience. Brad swallowed hard and aggressively adjusted his tie, taking a deliberate step away from the exposed Rolex. He needed a distraction, and he needed it immediately. He forced a loud, booming laugh that sounded entirely unnatural, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Listen to us arguing over watches," Brad announced, clapping his hands together as if the previous 2 minutes had never happened. "Let us get back to what actually matters. Let us talk about real power." He turned his back on Marcus, entirely addressing the murmuring crowd. "As I was saying before, we were so rudely interrupted. My Series B funding round is closing next week. $50 million. And it is not just any money. It is Vanguard Holdings money." Eleanor immediately jumped at the opportunity to change the subject and support her golden son-in-law. "That is right, Brad," she agreed loudly, stepping up beside him and glaring at me. "Tell them about the incredible people you are working with. Real businessmen, not street hustlers who inspect jewelry." Brad smirked, his confidence slowly returning as he clung to his favorite lie. "You see, Marcus, in my world, we do not care about cheap parlor tricks. We care about relationships. You claim you work in finance, but I guarantee you have never sat in a room with the true titans of the industry. The guys who move markets. Guys like my personal friend and mentor, the CEO of Vanguard Holdings himself." Vanessa smiled brightly, linking her arm through Brad's. "Tell him who it is, honey," she urged, her voice dripping with renewed arrogance. "Show them what real connections look like. Let them know who is backing your company." Brad puffed his chest out, looking over his shoulder at Marcus with a look of supreme triumph. "The man who runs Vanguard is an absolute legend," Brad stated proudly. "His name is Marcus Sterling. He is a billionaire 10 times over. And he does not just hand out $50 million checks to anyone. He invests in people he deeply trusts. People like me." I raised my wine glass to my lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the dark red liquid. I let the silence hang for a moment, watching Brad practically vibrate with smug satisfaction. "Oh," I said softly, lowering my glass. "You know Marcus Sterling personally?" Brad scoffed as if the question was incredibly insulting. "Know him?" Brad laughed loudly. "We are close friends, Zora. We do not just do business together, we golf together. Every other weekend we are out on the green at the Pelican Hill Golf Club. We drink exclusive single malt scotch in the private clubhouse and talk about the future of global tech infrastructure. He gives me life advice. He is practically a second father to me at this point. That is how elite my network is." Vanessa nodded eagerly, adding her own layer to the lie. "He even invited us to his private estate in the Hamptons for the summer," she bragged, looking at the other wives in the room to ensure they heard. "He treats Brad like a son." Eleanor beamed with pride, looking around the room to make sure all the wealthy guests were absorbing this impressive information. "Did you hear that, Zora?" Eleanor snapped. "Brad plays golf with actual billionaires. Your little hired actor over there probably does not even know which end of a golf club to hold." I ignored my mother completely, keeping my eyes locked on Brad. "That is truly fascinating, Brad," I said, my voice dangerously calm, but carrying clearly across the quiet room. "It is amazing that you have such a close, intimate relationship with the CEO of Vanguard Holdings. Since you two are such good friends, playing golf every weekend and drinking scotch together. Tell me something. What exactly does Marcus Sterling look like?" Brad did not even hesitate. He was so deep into his own delusion, so accustomed to lying without consequence to these country club snobs, that the words flowed effortlessly from his mouth. He waved his hand dismissively, painting a picture of a man who did not exist. What does he look like? Brad repeated with a sneer. He looks like a guy who owns half the country Zora. He is in his late 60s, silver hair, very distinguished. He has that classic old money East Coast vibe, always wears these custom Italian suits with a pastel tie. He is a tall white guy who talks with a slight Boston accent because he summered in Nantucket his whole life. He is a classic shark. Not that you would ever get within 100 feet of a guy like that. He has striking blue eyes and a firm handshake that lets you know he is in charge. A strange quiet settled over the room again. The guests listened intently to the detailed description. I looked at Vanessa, who was nodding along confidently as if she had met this imaginary old white man herself. I looked at Eleanor, who was smirking at me with absolute triumph, thinking her son-in-law had just won the ultimate victory. And then I looked at my husband. Marcus had not moved. He stood perfectly still, his hands still casually resting in the pockets of his tailored trousers, his dark eyes fixed intensely on Brad. A slow, genuine smile spread across his handsome face. It was not a smile of anger or offense. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey willingly walk directly into a brutal trap. "You golf with a tall, silver-haired white man from Nantucket?" I asked, making sure my voice carried to the very back of the room so there could be no misunderstandings. "Yes," Brad snapped, glaring at me, his face tight with annoyance. "And he is going to make me very rich next week. So why do not you and your fake boyfriend just leave before you embarrass yourselves any further tonight?" Marcus did not leave. Instead, he let out a soft, genuine laugh that seemed to echo off the marble floors. He unbuttoned the top button of his custom tuxedo jacket and reached slowly into his inner breast pocket. Every eye in the room tracked his movement. Brad stood with his arms crossed, a smug sneer plastered across his face, completely oblivious to the absolute destruction that was about to rain down upon his meticulously fabricated life. Marcus withdrew a single sleek black titanium business card. It caught the ambient light of the chandelier gleaming with a heavy, expensive weight. He held it out, resting it between his index and middle fingers, right in front of Brad's chest. "That is incredibly funny," Brad Marcus said, his deep voice cutting through the tension with lethal precision, "because I do not recall ever playing golf with you at Pelican Hill or anywhere else for that matter, and I definitely never invited you to my estate in the Hamptons." Brad let out a harsh scoff, shaking his head as if Marcus was a lunatic. "What are you talking about, you idiot?" Brad spat, reaching out to aggressively snatch the metal card from Marcus. "I was talking about my mentor. I was talking about Marcus Sterling. Not some hired thug who crashes private parties." Brad brought the card up to his face. The heavy black metal felt cold in his hand. The words were etched perfectly in silver foil. The transition from supreme arrogance to absolute terror took less than 3 seconds. Brad's eyes scanned the silver text. They locked onto the name. Then they locked onto the title. Marcus Sterling, Chief Executive Officer, Vanguard Holdings. All the blood instantly drained from Brad's face, leaving him looking like a freshly exhumed corpse. His jaw went slack. The fingers of his right hand, which was holding his crystal champagne flute, suddenly went numb. The heavy crystal glass slipped from his grip. It hit the marble floor with a violent crash, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. The sharp noise startled a waiter nearby, who accidentally backed into the sound system console, instantly unplugging the auxiliary cord. The soft jazz music cut off abruptly. Absolute suffocating silence gripped the room. Nobody breathed. The only sound was the leftover champagne fizzing across the expensive stone floor. Brad stood completely paralyzed. His mind was desperately trying to reject the reality standing right in front of him. The man he had just insulted, called a broke hustler, mocked for wearing a fake tuxedo, and offered a minimum wage job to, was the exact same man holding the keys to his entire future. The imaginary old white man with the Boston accent did not exist. The real Marcus Sterling, a self-made black billionaire, was staring right back at him. Vanessa, noticing the sheer terror on her husband's face, stepped forward. Her heels crunched loudly on the broken glass. "Brad, what is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling with sudden uncertainty. "What does the card say? Why did you drop your glass? Brad could not speak. He could not even swallow. He just stood there, trembling violently, clutching the titanium card as if it were burning his skin. Vanessa impatiently snatched the card from his frozen hand. She looked down at the silver lettering. She read it once. She blinked rapidly and read it again. A sharp gasp escaped her lips and she stumbled backward, bumping into the marble kitchen island. She looked from the card to Marcus, and then to me, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. My mother. Eleanor stepped forward, sensing the catastrophic shift in the atmosphere. Vanessa, what is going on? Eleanor demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. Who is this man? I stepped forward, linking my arm through my husband's. Allow me to reintroduce him. Mother, I said, my voice perfectly calm and laced with a satisfaction I had waited my entire life to feel. This is my husband, Marcus Sterling, the CEO of Vanguard Holdings, the man Brad has supposedly been golfing with every weekend. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of wealthy guests. Eleanor's hands began to shake uncontrollably. She looked at me, then at Marcus, her mind breaking under the weight of her own catastrophic mistake. The daughter she had just banished from the house, the daughter she had called a bitter loser, was actually married to a titan of industry. The guests began to whisper frantically, pulling out their phones to search his name. The results loaded instantly, confirming every single word I had said. The room turned against Brad and Vanessa in a heartbeat. The very people they had invited to impress were now looking at them with supreme disgust. Marcus adjusted his cuffs, his demeanor remaining terrifyingly calm. I must say, Brad, Marcus began, his voice echoing in the dead silent room, I am highly disappointed. When my analysts recommended your software company for a Series B investment, I was told you were a visionary. I was told you were a genius. But seeing you stand here wearing a fake $45,000 watch, lying to your own guests about knowing me personally, and disrespecting my wife and her own family circle, I am beginning to realize you are nothing more than a desperate con artist. Brad's knees physically buckled. He swayed on his feet, raising trembling hands in front of him as if trying to physically push away the nightmare he had just woken up in. Mr. Sterling. Brad choked out, his voice sounding like a dying animal. Sir, please, please, there has been a massive misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Brad Marcus replied coldly. You wanted to talk about real power. Let us talk about it. Brad swallowed so hard it was audible in the silent room. He frantically wiped his sweaty palms on his expensive trousers. Sir, I had no idea who you were, Brad stammered, his voice pitching up an octave. If Zora had just told me, I would have prepared a proper welcome for you. That whole thing about the fake husband and the watch, it was just a joke. It was just family banter. You know how families are, Mr. Sterling? We joke around. Please, you have to believe me. Marcus simply raised an eyebrow. Family banter. Marcus repeated the words, sounding like a death sentence. You told my wife to answer your phones for minimum wage. You told me I looked like a guy hoping nobody asks him to pay the dinner bill. Is that how you treat people when you think they have nothing to offer you, Brad? Because from where I am standing, it shows a fundamental lack of character. And at Vanguard, we do not invest $50 million in men with no character. Brad's eyes widened in sheer terror. The color that had rushed to his face earlier completely vanished again, leaving him looking sickeningly pale. He took a step forward, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. No, sir. Please do not say that, Brad pleaded. The Series B funding is everything. My team has been working on this for 2 years. We passed all your preliminary audits. The term sheet is sitting on my desk right now waiting for my signature. We can fix this. Let us go into my private study right now. We can sit down, have a real drink, and talk about the numbers. I can show you the updated user metrics. I can explain the burn rate. Please. Mr. Sterling, give me 5 minutes in private. You are not in a position to negotiate anything, Brad Marcus said, his tone flat and unyielding. You showed me exactly who you are tonight. Vanessa, who had been standing frozen against the marble kitchen island, finally snapped out of her shock. Her pride simply could not handle watching her arrogant husband grovel like a desperate beggar in front of the sister she despised. She stomped forward, her heels clicking aggressively on the floor. She grabbed Brad's arm, her acrylic nails digging into his custom suit jacket. "Brad, what are you doing?" Vanessa demanded, trying to yank him backward. "Stop humiliating yourself. I do not care if he is the CEO of Vanguard or the King of England. He is married to Zora. Zora. She is a nobody. And he came into our house and insulted us. Tell him to get out. We do not need his money. You are a genius, Brad. You can get funding from anywhere. Stop begging them." Brad whipped his head around, staring at his wife as if she had just grown a second head. "Are you insane?" Brad hissed, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and sudden blinding rage. "Shut your mouth, Vanessa. You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. You do not understand how close we are to losing everything." But Vanessa was too used to getting her way. She pulled on his arm harder, her face twisting with indignation in front of her wealthy friends. "No, I will not shut up!" Vanessa yelled, pointing a finger at me. "You are the man of this house. Act like it. Throw them out right now. We are not begging Zora or her husband for anything. I want them gone." "Get off me!" Brad roared. With a violent, aggressive shove, Brad threw Vanessa's hand off his arm. He pushed her backward so forcefully that she stumbled, tripping over her own high heels. She let out a sharp cry as she fell hard against the edge of the luxury sofa, barely catching herself before hitting the hardwood floor. The guests gasped out loud, stepping back in absolute horror. The perfect facade of their marriage completely disintegrated in front of everyone. The wealthy friends they had tried so hard to impress were now looking at them with open disgust and pity. Eleanor screamed, rushing over to help Vanessa up. "Brad, how could you put your hands on her?" Eleanor shrieked, her carefully maintained social mask shattering. "Have you lost your mind?" Brad ignored his mother-in-law completely. He did not even look down to see if his wife was hurt or bleeding. His eyes were wide, wild, and completely fixated on Marcus. He was a man watching his entire empire burn to the ground, and he was willing to sacrifice his own family to save it. "I am so sorry about her, Mr. Sterling," Brad begged, clasping his hands together like a man praying for his life. "She does not understand business. She is just an emotional woman. I make the decisions here. Please, sir, I am begging you. Do not pull the term sheet. My company will go under if Vanguard backs out now. All the other investors will jump ship if they see you walk away. I will do whatever you want. I will restructure the board. I will step down as CEO if I have to. Just please let us go to the study and talk. I cannot lose this deal. I cannot lose this deal," Brad pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. Marcus looked down at the pathetic man kneeling figuratively at his feet. "You already lost the deal, Brad," Marcus stated, his voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "You lost it the moment you decided to lie to my forensic accounting team." Marcus reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored tuxedo jacket for the second time. He did not pull out another business card. Instead, he withdrew a tightly folded packet of thick executive paper. He unfolded it slowly, the crisp sound of the paper echoing in the dead-silent living room. "What is that?" Brad whispered, his eyes darting to the document as if it were a loaded weapon pointed directly at his chest. "This is the final due diligence report generated by Vanguard Holdings, Risk Assessment Division," Marcus replied, holding the papers up so the room could see the official letterhead. "My team completed this audit yesterday afternoon. I was originally planning to have my legal department send you the formal rejection letter on Monday morning, but since we are all here together celebrating your supposed genius, I think it is only fair that I share the results with your friends and family right now." "No," Brad choked out, lunging forward slightly as if he could physically grab the papers and swallow them. "You cannot do this. That information is strictly confidential under our non-disclosure agreement." You forfeited confidentiality when you committed federal wire fraud? Marcus said sharply, stepping back smoothly to avoid Brad's desperate grasp. He adjusted the document and began to read aloud, his voice projecting clearly across the massive room. Let us start with your user metrics. You pitched my board, claiming your platform had 2 million daily active users. You built your entire $50 million valuation on that single fabricated metric. But my engineers ran a deep diagnostic on your back-end servers. They found that 85% of your traffic originates from coordinated bot farms located in Eastern Europe. Your actual human user base is barely 300,000. Your company is a ghost town, Brad. The wealthy guests gasped collectively. Several businessmen in the crowd shook their heads in absolute disgust. Faking user metrics was a cardinal sin in the tech world. It is a standard growth strategy. Brad babbled, desperately looking around the room for anyone who would listen to his lies. Everyone inflates their early numbers for seed rounds. It is just aggressive marketing. We are optimizing the algorithm to convert those bot interactions into real marketable leads. You do not convert software bots into human beings, Brad Marcus replied coldly. But the fake users are not even the worst part of your portfolio. The worst part is the outright embezzlement. Vanessa gasped loudly, covering her mouth with both trembling hands. Embezzlement, she repeated the word, sounding foreign and terrifying on her tongue. She stared at her husband as if she no longer recognized the man standing in front of her. Marcus flipped to the second page of the financial report. Your legal disclosures listed a capital expenditure of $3 million for offshore server infrastructure over the last 2 quarters. However, my forensic accountants tracked those wire transfers. The money never went to any server hosting companies. It went directly to a private shell corporation registered in Delaware, a corporation that lists you, Brad, as the sole managing beneficiary. Brad's knees finally gave out completely. He slumped heavily against the edge of the marble coffee table, unable to support his own weight anymore. He buried his face in his hands. You have been systematically draining your current investors' funds, Marcus continued, relentlessly refusing to give the man a single second to breathe. You used their money to fund your fraudulent lifestyle. You used it to pay the lease on your sports cars. You used it to buy first-class tickets to private resorts. You used it to pay the exorbitant rent on this mansion, and you tried to use it to pay for this luxury New Year's Eve party before your accounts were completely frozen and my wife had to step in and save you from public humiliation. I am ruined, Brad whispered, his voice muffled behind his hands. Yes, you are. Marcus confirmed, his tone absolute. The $50 million deal with Vanguard Holdings is officially dead. I will not be signing the term sheet. But it gets much worse for you, Brad. As the CEO of a major financial institution, I have a strict ethical and legal fiduciary duty. When my teams uncover blatant financial crimes during an audit, we do not just quietly walk away and keep your secrets. We report it. Brad's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a new level of absolute terror. What did you do? He croaked. I did what was legally required, Marcus said, folding the papers and slipping them back into his jacket pocket. At 5 o'clock this evening, my legal team forwarded this entire forensic audit to the Securities and Exchange Commission. We also sent courtesy copies to every single one of your current seed investors. They are all pulling their funding effective tomorrow morning. Your company is bankrupt, Brad, and you are going to prison. Brad let out a sound that was half sob and half gasp, collapsing entirely onto the floor. But before the reality of his impending federal indictment could fully settle over the room, a piercing shriek shattered the heavy silence. It was not a cry of despair. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated rage. Vanessa pushed herself off the marble island, her face contorted into a mask of pure fury. The shock had completely evaporated from her system, replaced instantly by a blinding, venomous hatred. But she did not direct that hatred at the man kneeling on the floor who had just been exposed as a massive fraud. She did not look at the husband who had stolen millions of dollars and jeopardized her entire future. Instead, she locked her wild eyes directly on me. You planned this. Vanessa screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet living room. She stomped across the shattered glass, not even caring as the crystal shards crunched beneath her expensive heels. You set this whole thing up, Zora. You knew exactly what you were doing. I watched my sister charge toward me, my expression completely unchanged. I did not step back. Marcus stood firmly by my side, his presence a solid wall of protection, but he did not need to intervene. I was more than ready to handle her. Planned what, Vanessa? I asked, my tone perfectly level. Did I plan for your husband to embezzle millions of dollars from his investors? Did I plan for him to build a fake software company using bot farms? Vanessa stopped just a few feet away from me, her chest heaving violently. Yes, she hissed, her face inches from mine. You knew Vanguard was looking into his company. You have always been obsessed with ruining my life. You have been jealous of me since we were little girls. You could not stand the fact that I married a brilliant CEO and lived in a mansion while you were just a miserable financial manager. So you found out who was funding him, and you manipulated your way into Marcus' life just to sabotage my husband. The sheer level of delusion in her accusation was almost impressive. Even a few of the wealthy guests who had been whispering amongst themselves stopped to stare at her in complete disbelief. She was completely bypassing the fact that her husband was a criminal just to maintain her narrative that I was the villain of her story. You think I married a billionaire just to ruin a $50 million deal for Brad? I asked, letting a soft laugh escape my lips. You really think you are the center of the universe, Vanessa? I married Marcus because I love him. Brad ruined his own deal the second he decided to steal from my husband's firm. I did not make him lie. I did not make him buy fake watches. And I certainly did not make him disrespect the man holding his purse strings right to his face. Shut up! Vanessa shrieked violently, swatting the air between us. I do not want to hear your lies, Zora. You are evil. You are a toxic, jealous snake. You brought him here tonight on purpose. You waited until New Year's Eve just to drop this on us so you could feel powerful for once in your pathetic life. You wanted to stand in front of my high society friends and pretend you are better than me. Eleanor finally stepped forward, her face pale and her hands shaking. Vanessa. Please, Eleanor whispered, trying to grab her daughter's arm. Do not make a scene in front of everyone. People are staring at us. Get off me, Mom! Vanessa yelled, shoving Eleanor's hand away. She turned her crazed gaze back to me, her eyes bloodshot and wide. You are not going to win, Zora. Do you hear me? Brad is a genius. He will find other investors. He will bounce back from this, and we will still be richer and better than you will ever be. My husband is a white man in tech. They run the world. Nobody is going to throw him in prison over some stupid accounting error. He just made a tiny mistake, and you blew it out of proportion because you hate to see me happy. Brad let out another pathetic whimper from the floor, burying his face deeper into his hands, but Vanessa ignored him completely. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at the heavy oak front doors. Get out! Vanessa commanded, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and vibrating through the tense room. Get the hell out of my house right now, both of you. You are not welcome here. I want you off my property immediately. You think you can waltz into my $4 million mansion, drink my expensive wine, and ruin my perfect life. You are nothing but a guest here. This is my house, Zora, my sanctuary. I am the lady of this manor, and I am ordering you to leave before I call the police and have you both arrested for trespassing. I looked around the massive, beautifully decorated living room. I looked at the vaulted ceilings, the imported marble floors, and the grand crystal chandelier hanging above us. Then I looked back at my sister, who was shaking with arrogant rage, firmly believing she still held absolute power over me because she thought she owned the ground I was standing on. I did not move a single inch. I did not turn toward the heavy oak doors, and I certainly did not look intimidated by her screaming. Instead, I slowly shifted my gaze around the massive living room, taking in the lavish details of the property. I looked at the expensive modern art hanging on the walls, the custom silk drapes framing the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the imported Italian leather furniture sitting on the pristine hardwood floors. Everything looked picture perfect. But just like Brad's tech company and his fake gold watch, the foundation of this beautiful home was an absolute lie. Your house? I asked, my voice echoing softly in the tense space. I tilted my head, looking back at Vanessa, who was glaring at me with raw hatred. You just said, "This is your house, Vanessa." You said, "I am trespassing on your property, and you are the lady of the manor." Vanessa crossed her arms tightly over her chest, her acrylic nails digging into the fabric of her expensive designer dress. "Yes, it is my house." She snapped, her voice sharp and incredibly defensive. "I am the one who hosts these elite parties. I am the one who decides who gets to walk through those custom front doors. And I am telling you to leave right now, Zora." I let out a soft, dry chuckle, shaking my head slightly. I took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us. "You are the lady of the manor," I repeated, letting the words hang heavily in the air for every single guest to hear. "That is a very interesting title, Vanessa, especially considering the fact that your name is not actually on the deed to this property." "Is it?" A collective murmur rippled through the remaining guests. Vanessa flinched visibly, but she quickly recovered her posture, jutting her chin out in pure defiance. She was determined to spin the truth into another arrogant flex to save her crumbling social status. "Obviously, we do not own it outright yet," Vanessa scoffed, waving her hand dismissively, as if buying a $4 million estate was just a minor detail. "We lease it. But it is not just some cheap rental, Zora. We lease this estate from an exclusive luxury corporate firm called Horizon LLC. It is a highly vetted private portfolio. They only lease to ultra-high net worth individuals. We had to go through a rigorous financial background check. Horizon LLC demands proof of massive liquid assets. They do not just let anyone walk in off the street. They knew Brad was a tech visionary. They courted us for this property. We pay $20,000 a month just to live here. $20,000 a month, Zora. That is probably more than you make in an entire year working your sad little desk job." Eleanor immediately stepped up to support her golden daughter, eager to twist the knife and remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. Her fear of Marcus seemed to fade slightly now that Vanessa was loudly reasserting her financial dominance over me. "You have a lot of nerve coming in here and questioning your sister's living arrangements," Eleanor sneered, her face twisting with bitter contempt. "Vanessa and Brad live in a neighborhood you could never even dream of entering. You could not afford to buy a doormat in this zip code, Zora. While you are living in a tiny, cramped apartment with cheap furniture, Vanessa is hosting galas in a kitchen imported straight from Italy. You spend your days managing other people's money, pretending you belong in their world. But Vanessa actually lives it. She writes a $20,000 check every single month without breaking a sweat. So do not stand there and try to act superior just because you found a rich man to marry you. You are still the same broke, jealous girl you have always been." I stood perfectly still, letting my mother and sister hurl their pathetic insults. I let them dig their own graves right in front of the wealthy elite they worshipped so desperately. I looked down at Brad, who was still kneeling on the marble floor, silently weeping into his hands, completely broken by the reality of his impending federal prison sentence. He knew exactly what was happening, but he was too paralyzed by fear to warn his loud, arrogant wife. "So, just to be perfectly clear," I said, my voice cutting through the noise with absolute precision, "you do not own this $4 million mansion. You rent it from a private corporate firm called Horizon LLC, and you signed a legally binding lease agreement promising to pay that firm $20,000 on the first of every single month." "Yes," Vanessa shouted, her patience completely gone, her face red with exertion. "That is exactly what I just said. We pay Horizon LLC. We are their best clients. Now get out of my house before I have security drag you out by your hair." Eleanor nodded vigorously, crossing her arms and glaring at me with absolute disgust. "You heard her, Zora. You and your husband need to leave immediately. You have caused enough damage for one night. Let Vanessa and Brad enjoy their luxury home in peace." I smiled. It was not a warm smile or a polite smile. It was the cold, calculated smile of a woman who had spent 35 years being treated like garbage and was finally about to take out the trash. I slowly reached into my designer clutch, letting my fingers brush against the thick, folded stack of legal documents I had been carrying all night. The moment of absolute destruction had finally arrived. I pulled the crisp papers out of my clutch. The legal documents felt like a weapon. I unfolded them slowly, making sure everyone was watching. I looked at Vanessa, who was standing tall with her arms crossed, waiting for me to leave her home. "You are right about luxury real estate, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Wealthy individuals rarely buy properties under their personal names. They use limited liability companies to protect privacy and shield assets. Horizon LLC is an exclusive firm managing the most sought-after estates in this state. But there is a detail Brad forgot to teach you." Vanessa narrowed her eyes, dropping her arms. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "I know how a leasing company works, Zora. You do not need to give me a real estate lesson in front of my friends. Just put your papers away and get out of my house before I have you removed." I took a step forward, holding the papers up so the notary seal caught the light. "A leasing company is not a living, breathing entity, Vanessa," I continued, ignoring her threats. "An LLC is simply a legal shield. Behind every corporate firm, there is a real person holding the keys. There is a sole proprietor who owns the physical assets, collects the rent, and holds ultimate legal power over the property." Eleanor scoffed, rolling her eyes. She stepped closer to Vanessa, forming a united front. "And what does that have to do with anything, Zora?" she demanded. "Do you think because you work in wealth management you know the owner of Horizon LLC? Are you going to try to get your sister evicted? You are delusional. You are trying to ruin this party because you have nothing of your own." I turned my gaze to my mother, letting a cold smile spread across my face. "I do not need to call anyone mother," I replied softly. "I am already here." I flipped to the last page of the document and held it out toward Vanessa. She hesitated before snatching the papers from my hand. "Read the signature at the bottom of the page," I instructed, my voice ringing clearly. "Read the name of the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of Horizon LLC." Vanessa glared at me before looking down at the legal document. Her eyes scanned the dense legal text, searching for the signature line. The room fell into a deathly silence as everyone waited for her reaction. I watched her manicured finger trace the black ink. I watched her lips part slightly as she read the printed name silently to herself. Then I watched her entire world shatter into a million jagged pieces. Vanessa's face instantly drained of all color. Her mouth opened but no sound came out. She stared at the paper as if it had suddenly caught fire in her hands. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head back and forth in frantic denial. "Read it loud." "Vanessa," I commanded, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that still managed to fill the quiet room. "Tell your friends who actually owns this estate." She could not speak. Her hands began to shake so violently that the paper rattled loudly in the silent space. Eleanor stepped forward, grabbing her daughter's arm. "Vanessa, what is it?" Eleanor asked, her voice rising in sheer panic. "What does the paper say? Tell me now." "Since my sister has lost her voice, I will read it for her," I announced, facing the crowd. "I bought this property 2 years ago as an investment. I placed it under my holding company, Horizon LLC, to maintain my privacy. When your agent submitted an application to rent this house last year, my management team brought it to my desk. I saw your names on the lease and I approved it." The guests gasped out loud. Several people covered their mouths in shock, staring at me with wide eyes. I stepped right up to Vanessa, who was completely paralyzed. "You do not own this house, Vanessa," I said, my words striking her like physical blows. "You are not the lady of the manor. You are my tenant. I am your landlord. You have been paying me $20,000 a month to live in my house. The marble floors you are standing on, the custom drapes you are bragging about, the heated pool, they all belong to me." Vanessa slowly dropped the legal document. It fluttered to the floor, landing next to Brad's knee. She stared at me in absolute terror. The grand illusion of her supreme wealth and superior status was entirely destroyed. She was living in a house owned by the exact same sister she had spent her entire life tormenting and belittling. The initial shock that paralyzed Vanessa lasted only a few seconds before her natural instinct for denial violently kicked in. She lunged forward, dropping to her knees on the marble floor, and snatched the legal document right from under Brad's trembling hands. "This is a lie. You printed this off the internet, Zora. You cannot own this property. You do not have the kind of capital required to buy a $4 million estate." She scrambled back to her feet, holding the papers up to the light. Her eyes darted across the pages, searching for any typo that could prove I was lying. The state tax seals were officially embossed. The notary stamps were authentic. The signature transferring ownership of Horizon LLC directly to me was undeniably verified by a federal judge. It was a legally binding, ironclad reality. She could not gaslight her way out of a government-issued property deed. Eleanor peered over Vanessa's shoulder, her face turning an ashen shade of gray as she recognized the official state tax stamps. Vanessa Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "It is real. The house is hers." Vanessa aggressively shoved her mother away, crumpling the edges of the document in her fists. "Fine!" Vanessa shouted, trying to reclaim her dignity. "Fine, Zora, fine. You own the house. You bought a property and hid behind a corporate shell. But it does not matter. You are still just a landlord. We are the ones actually living the luxury lifestyle. We pay you $20,000 every single month. We are funding your little real estate empire. You should be thanking us for keeping you in business. Without our lease agreement, you would be drowning in property taxes." I slowly shook my head, feeling pity for how clueless my sister was. "You really do not pay any attention to your own household finances, do you, Vanessa?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm against her hysteria. "You just swipe your credit cards and assume Brad is taking care of the rest." "What does that mean?" Vanessa snapped. "It means you are not funding my empire, Vanessa," I replied. "It means your husband has been lying to you about a lot more than just his fake user metrics and his fake golf games with billionaires." Brad let out a groan, burying his face in his hands. He knew exactly what was coming next. I pulled a second perfectly folded piece of paper from my designer clutch. "Your first year in this house was fully paid up," I explained, holding the new document up for her to see. "You signed a 2-year lease." But the tech market started crashing, and Brad's investors started asking questions. His cash flow dried up entirely. "So 3 months ago, your rent check bounced. I received a formal notice from my property management team that the account connected to Horizon LLC had insufficient funds." Vanessa blinked, staring at me in complete confusion. "Bounced?" She repeated the word slowly, as if I were speaking a foreign language. "That is impossible. Brad just moved money into a new offshore account last week. It was a banking error. He told me it was just a minor delay." "It was not a banking error," I stated firmly, my voice cutting through her pathetic excuses. The next month, the check bounced again. And then the third month came and went without a single penny deposited into my accounts. I had my financial team look into your husband's shell corporations, and they found nothing but massive debt. He maxed out every line of credit he had, just to keep up appearances. He stopped paying your rent to fund his fraudulent lifestyle. He chose to buy fake Rolex watches and hire luxury caterers instead of paying for the roof over your head. The murmuring among the guests grew louder. They were witnessing the complete financial execution of the couple they had envied. People began inching toward the coat check, eager to distance themselves from a sinking ship. "You have not paid a single dime in rent for the last 90 days, I announced loudly to the room. "You are currently $60,000 in arrears, Vanessa. You owe me $60,000 just for the privilege of standing in my living room and insulting me all night. Your supreme wealth is nothing but a mountain of unpaid bills. You are completely broke." Vanessa slowly turned her head to look down at Brad. Her expression shifted from aggressive arrogance to profound horror. "Brad," she whispered, her voice trembling uncontrollably. Tell me she is lying. Tell me we have the money. Brad did not look up. He just shook his head, weeping silently against the cold marble floor of a house he did not own and could no longer afford. The sound of Brad's pathetic sobbing was the only noise left in the massive living room. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely no sympathy for the man who had just tried to humiliate me and my husband. Then I turned my attention back to my sister. I reached into my designer clutch one final time, pulling out a second document. This one was not printed on standard corporate paper. It was printed on thick legal stock and stapled at the top corner with a bright red court seal stamped aggressively over the front page. I held it out toward Vanessa. She flinched physically, backing away from the paper as if it were coated in poison. She refused to take it, so I let it drop from my hand. It fluttered down, landing directly on top of Brad's shoulder before sliding onto the floor next to the shattered crystal champagne glass. "What is that?" Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling so badly I could barely hear her. "That is a court-ordered eviction notice," I stated, my voice loud enough for the remaining guests to hear. "I filed the paperwork 3 weeks ago when the second check bounced, but the judge officially signed off on it yesterday morning." "You cannot do that!" Vanessa shrieked, suddenly finding her voice again. "You cannot just throw people out on the street. We have tenant rights, Zora. It takes months to evict someone in this state. You have to give us a 30-day notice. I know the law. You know the standard law for residential tenants," I corrected her smoothly. "But you did not sign a standard residential lease, Vanessa. You signed a luxury corporate lease, and you violated a very specific clause in that contract tonight." She stared at me, her chest heaving as panic completely consumed her. "What clause?" she gasped. "The commercial event clause," I explained, taking a slow step forward, forcing her to back up until she hit the edge of the kitchen island. "You are currently hosting a massive catered party with over 50 guests, serving alcohol without a permit, and acting as a commercial networking event for your husband's fraudulent tech company. You did all of this while being $60,000 in severe default on your rent." When my lawyers presented that fact to the judge, along with the evidence of Brad's empty shell corporations, the judge granted an expedited emergency eviction. Eleanor let out a sharp gasp, pressing her hands against her chest. "Zora, you are going to make your sister homeless on New Year's Eve. How can you be so cruel?" "She made herself homeless, Mother," I replied without looking away from Vanessa. "I am just the person holding the door open for her on the way out." I pointed down at the red-stamped paper on the floor. "The local police precinct received their copy of that notice at 4 o'clock this afternoon. They are currently on standby. The only reason a squad car is not parked in the driveway right now is because I asked the authorities for a small professional courtesy. I told them I would deliver the notice personally so as not to cause a public scene during your holiday gathering." Vanessa looked around the room. The party was entirely dead. The wealthy elite of the city were not known for their loyalty. They were known for their self-preservation. I watched the CEO of a major retail chain grab his wife's arm and hustle her out the front door, without even a backward glance. The women who had been complimenting Vanessa's dress just an hour ago were now whispering frantically to each other as they grabbed their mink coats. They looked at Vanessa not with pity, but with intense social revulsion. She was no longer one of them. She was a liability. The caterers were quietly packing up the silver platters of caviar and slipping out the back door, leaving the opulent spread untouched. Vanessa dropped to her knees right next to Brad. She looked up at me, her perfectly styled blonde hair falling wildly into her tear-streaked face. "Zora, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. "You cannot do this to me. We have nowhere to go. All of our money is tied up in Brad's company. My credit cards are maxed out. We cannot even afford to rent a hotel room tonight. Please just give us a week to figure things out. We are blood, Zora. You cannot throw your own sister out onto the street in the dead of winter." I looked down at her, feeling a profound sense of closure. "You were perfectly fine with me being broke and alone, Vanessa," I reminded her coldly. You were perfectly fine with laughing at me insulting my husband and ordering me to leave your house just 10 minutes ago. You demanded that I pay you $10,000 just to stand in a house that I actually own. So do not try to weaponize our blood now that the tables have turned. Your arrogance wrote a check that your bank account could not cash. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises. I told her, my voice dropping to a cold, authoritative tone. You have until midnight tomorrow to pack up your designer clothes, your luxury shoes, and whatever cheap furniture you actually own. Leave the keys on the kitchen counter. If you or your husband are found anywhere on this property at 1 minute past midnight, the police will arrive. They will not ask questions, and they will not listen to your excuses. They will simply escort both of you off my estate in handcuffs. Vanessa clamped her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut, as if that would make my words disappear. This is a nightmare, she sobbed. No, Vanessa, I said softly. This is reality. The nightmare begins tomorrow when you wake up and realize you have absolutely nowhere to go. Vanessa buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably against the cold marble floor. The sound of her despair echoed in the massive room, but the most shocking reaction did not come from her or Brad. It came from the woman standing just a few feet away. My mother Eleanor stood perfectly still for a long moment. I watched her eyes dart from the eviction notice on the floor to the shattered champagne glass, and finally to the pathetic weeping forms of her golden child and her perfect son-in-law. I could practically see the gears turning in her head. Eleanor was a survivalist in the most parasitic sense of the word. She had spent her entire life attaching herself to whoever had the most money and the highest social standing. For years, that person had been Brad. But now Brad was a bankrupt fraud facing federal prison, and Vanessa was a broke tenant about to be thrown out onto the street. The gravy train had violently derailed. In a matter of seconds, Eleanor made her choice. She physically took a step back away from Vanessa as if poverty and failure were contagious diseases. She smoothed down the front of her expensive designer dress, took a deep breath, and completely transformed her face. The bitter, angry scowl she had worn all night melted away. It was replaced by a trembling, watery smile that looked incredibly unnatural. She turned her back on Vanessa entirely and began walking toward me. She held her arms out wide, her eyes welling up with tears that she commanded on cue. "Oh, Zora." Eleanor cried out, her voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet fake warmth. "My beautiful, brilliant Zora. I cannot believe it. I am just so incredibly overwhelmed with pride right now." She closed the distance between us and lunged forward, attempting to wrap her arms around my neck for a tight maternal embrace. I took a swift, deliberate step backward, leaving her grasping at empty air. Marcus shifted his weight beside me, his presence a silent warning, but I held up a hand to let him know I was fine. I did not need protection from her. I just needed to watch her expose her true nature to everyone left in the room. Eleanor dropped her arms, looking slightly embarrassed, but she quickly recovered. She clasped her hands together over her heart, letting a single dramatic tear roll down her cheek. "You have to understand, Zora," my mother pleaded, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Everything I said earlier, everything I have done over the years, it was all a test. I knew you were the special one. I always knew you had this incredible fire inside you. You were so smart and so capable even when you were a little girl." I stared at her, feeling a wave of pure nausea wash over me. "A test," I repeated, my voice flat and completely devoid of affection. "You stealing my college fund to pay off Vanessa's credit card debt was a test." "Yes." Eleanor nodded vigorously, completely leaning into the absurd lie. "I had to push you, Zora. I had to make life difficult for you so you would learn how to fight for yourself. Look at Vanessa. I babied her, and look how weak she turned out to be. She married a criminal and lost everything because she never learned how to stand on her own 2 feet. But you, Zora, you became a titan. You built a real estate empire and married a wonderful, powerful man. I made you who you are today. I was just playing the bad guy to give you motivation." Vanessa stopped crying for a fraction of a second, lifting her tear-stained face from the floor to stare at our mother in absolute horror. Mom Vanessa choked out, her voice barely a whisper. What are you saying? How can you say that? Eleanor did not even look back at her crying daughter. She kept her eyes locked on me, a desperate, hungry look flashing in her eyes. Zora, listen to me. Eleanor continued, stepping closer and lowering her voice, as if we were co-conspirators. You know I cannot possibly stay with Vanessa now. The scandal is going to be absolutely humiliating. The press will be all over Brad and his company. I am an older woman, Zora. I have a fragile heart. I cannot be subjected to the stress of a federal investigation and an eviction. I tilted my head, watching the ultimate parasite try to attach herself to a new host. So what are you suggesting, Mother? I asked, encouraging her to dig her hole even deeper. Well, Eleanor smiled, wiping away her fake tears. You own this magnificent holding company. You must have dozens of beautiful properties. You surely have a luxury guest house on one of your private estates. It only makes sense for me to move in with you and Marcus. A mother belongs with her successful daughter. We can finally have the close relationship we were always meant to have. I can help you decorate. I can host charity galas with you. We can leave all this ugly mess behind us. She reached out tentatively, trying to gently stroke my arm. You are a multi-millionaire, Zora. You have more money than we could ever spend. You will not let your own mother suffer because of Vanessa's foolish mistakes, will you? Please, Zora, take me with you. I looked down at her hand resting on my sleeve. I felt no anger anymore. I only felt a cold, clinical disgust for the woman who had birthed me. I slowly reached over and grabbed her wrist, lifting her hand off my arm and dropping it back to her side. I slowly reached over and grabbed her wrist, lifting her hand off my arm and dropping it back to her side. I do not want you anywhere near me, Mother, I said, my voice completely stripped of any emotion. You did not test me to make me strong. You tore me down because you are a fundamentally miserable person who resents anyone else finding success. You worshipped Vanessa because she was a reflection of your own shallow greed. And now that her reflection is shattered, you are desperately trying to cling to mine. Eleanor gasped, clutching her chest, as if she had been physically struck. Zora, how can you speak to your mother that way? She cried, looking around, hoping to garner some sympathy from the lingering crowd. I gave you life. I sacrificed everything for you. You sacrificed my future to fund your luxury lifestyle. I corrected her firmly. But you did not stop there, did you? You and Vanessa were not just content with stealing my college fund years ago. You were planning an encore performance just this week. Eleanor froze. Her fake tears instantly stopped falling. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice suddenly tight and cautious. I reached into my clutch for the final time tonight. I did not pull out a legal document. I pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen, unlocking it and opening my voicemail app. You have never been very good with technology, Mother, I said, holding the phone up. You still struggle to lock your screen before putting it in your purse. 2 days ago, you called me to demand I bring an expensive bottle of wine tonight. I did not answer, so your call went to voicemail. But after you left your nasty message, you forgot to hang up. Your phone slipped into your bag and the line stayed open. It recorded your private conversation with Vanessa for 3 full minutes. Vanessa scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with fresh panic. Mom, what did you say? Vanessa hissed, grabbing Eleanor's arm. Let us all listen together, I announced. I turned the volume up and hit play. The audio was slightly muffled by the fabric of her purse, but the voices were unmistakably clear. The recording echoed loudly in the quiet living room, exposing their darkest secret. Eleanor's recorded voice filled the space. I am telling you, Vanessa, we just use her social security number. I still have a copy of her birth certificate and her old tax returns in my filing cabinet. Then Vanessa's recorded voice replied, sounding desperate. Are you sure, Mom? Zora monitors her credit closely. What if she gets an alert from the bank? She will not notice immediately. Eleanor's recorded voice scoffed. She is too busy working. We just opened 2 high-limit platinum cards under her name, have them mailed directly to my apartment, and max them out to cover Brad's investors. By the time Zora realizes her identity has been stolen, Brad will have closed the Vanguard deal and we can pay the cards off before it ever goes to collections. She will never even know it was us. We have to do this, Vanessa. We cannot lose the house. I tapped the screen, stopping the recording. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The remaining guests looked physically repulsed. Identity theft, fraud, embezzlement. The perfect wealthy family was actually a syndicate of desperate criminals. I looked at Eleanor. The mask of the loving, misunderstood mother completely melted off her face. Her posture straightened and the fake trembling stopped. Her eyes grew cold, dark, and entirely venomous. She did not look sorry. She looked absolutely furious that she had been caught. "You were going to steal my identity to pay off the debts of a fake tech CEO?" I asked, staring directly into her cold eyes. "You were going to ruin my financial standing to save a mansion that I already owned?" Eleanor bared her teeth, stepping forward with her fists clenched. "You owe us, Zora," she snarled, all pretense of maternal love gone. "You have millions of dollars. You are sitting on a fortune while your family struggles. We took care of you. You were supposed to share your wealth with us. It is not stealing if it is family money." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You are delusional, Eleanor. You are a criminal. And you are incredibly lucky I decided to evict you instead of handing that audio file over to the police tonight." Marcus stepped forward, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. His dark eyes locked onto Eleanor with terrifying intensity. "If you ever contact my wife again," Marcus warned, his voice vibrating with lethal authority, "my lawyers will ensure you spend your retirement in a federal penitentiary right next to Brad. Do not test me, Eleanor. You will not survive it." Eleanor stumbled backward, terrified by the promise of destruction in his eyes. She looked at Vanessa and Brad, who were entirely defeated, broken, and waiting for their inevitable ruin. She had no one left to manipulate. Her entire world had collapsed. Her entire world had collapsed. Eleanor slowly turned her head away from Marcus and looked at the two people still cowering on the marble floor. The realization that I was completely out of her reach finally settled into her greedy mind. She was trapped. She had attached her entire livelihood and social standing to a sinking ship. And like a starved wolf backed into a corner, she instantly turned her fangs on the nearest targets. "You stupid, pathetic little man!" Eleanor screamed, her voice cracking, as she marched directly toward Brad. She pointed a trembling finger right at his face. "You promised me you were a tech genius. You sat at my dinner table and bragged about your offshore accounts. You let me believe my daughter was marrying the next corporate titan, and you are nothing but a cheap thief. You ruined everything. You ruined my life." Brad, who had been weeping silently on the floor, finally snapped. The sheer weight of the night, the public exposure of his crimes, the loss of his company, and the looming threat of federal prison broke whatever polite filter he had left. He scrambled to his feet, his face red and blotchy, his custom suit wrinkled and stained with his own tears. "Shut your mouth, Eleanor!" Brad roared back at her, stepping forward so aggressively that my mother actually flinched. "Do not you dare stand there and act like a victim tonight. You knew exactly what kind of game we were playing. You loved the money. You loved spending my cash at your elite country club and bragging to your snobby friends about my startup. You never once asked where the money came from, as long as I kept paying for your luxury vacations to Aspen. You are a parasite, Eleanor." Vanessa gasped, pushing herself off the floor. "Do not talk to my mother like that, Brad," she yelled, her face twisting with absolute indignation. "She is not the one who embezzled millions of dollars and lied to Vanguard Holdings. You are the fraud. You lied to me. You told me we were rich." Brad whipped his head around to face his wife, his eyes bulging with pure fury. "I lied to you." Brad laughed, a harsh, manic sound that echoed in the empty living room. "I had to lie to you, Vanessa, because you are a bottomless pit of greed. Do you have any idea how much money it takes to keep you happy? You demand a $4 million mansion. You demand $20,000 a month in rent. You spend $30,000 a month on designer bags and shoes you wear exactly one time. You insisted on throwing an $80,000 New Year's Eve party just to impress people who do not even like you. I stole that money for you. Vanessa stepped forward, her hands balled into tight fists. I did not ask you to commit federal wire fraud, she screamed right back at him. I asked you to be a successful man. I asked you to provide for me the way you promised you would when we got married. I married a CEO, Brad. I did not marry a broke criminal who wears fake Rolex watches. You humiliated me tonight. You destroyed my social standing. The sound of the slap was incredibly loud. Vanessa swung her arm back and struck Brad straight across his face with an open palm. The force of the blow snapped his head to the side, leaving a bright red handprint spreading quickly across his pale cheek. Brad stood frozen for a second, touching his stinging face. He looked at his wife with a mixture of absolute hatred and disbelief. We are done, Vanessa, he hissed, his voice shaking with pure venom. When the FBI comes for me tomorrow, I am telling them everything. I am telling them about the shell accounts you signed off on. I am telling them about the money you funneled to your mother. You are going down right alongside me. Eleanor let out a blood-curdling shriek, grabbing her own hair in a complete panic. No, you will not! Eleanor screamed, her voice turning completely hysterical. I have nothing to do with your crimes. My retirement is completely ruined. I have no savings left. I gave you my savings to invest in your fake company last year. You stole my retirement, Brad. I am going to end up in a state-run nursing home because of you two. You are both selfish, disgusting monsters. The three of them collapsed into a chaotic, vicious screaming match. Vanessa violently shoved Brad. Brad yelled about the massive credit card debt. Eleanor cried about her lost retirement funds and her destroyed reputation. They paced around the shattered crystal and the discarded eviction notice, completely consumed by their own toxicity. I stood quietly beside Marcus, watching the absolute destruction of the perfect family unit. They were tearing each other to pieces physically and emotionally, stripping away the final layers of their fake wealthy personas. For 35 years, I had been their punching bag. I had been the scapegoat they used to unite themselves, but without me to absorb their cruelty, their poison had nowhere else to go. So they turned it on each other. Marcus leaned down slightly, his lips brushing against my ear. It is quite a show, he murmured, his deep voice calm and unaffected by the screaming match happening just a few feet away. It is exactly what they deserve, I replied softly, feeling a deep, profound sense of peace settle over my heart. I watched my sister cry over her lost mansion. I watched my brother-in-law panic over his impending prison sentence. And I watched my mother realize she was entirely alone in the world. The justice was absolute. And the night was not even over yet. The sharp, vibrating ring of a cell phone suddenly cut through the chaotic screaming match. It was a loud, obnoxious electronic tune coming from the inside pocket of Brad's ruined custom suit jacket. He ignored it at first, too busy pointing his finger at Eleanor and blaming her for his financial ruin. But the phone did not stop. It rang relentlessly, echoing against the vaulted ceilings and demanding attention. Vanessa covered her ears with her hands, letting out a frustrated shriek. Answer your stupid phone, Brad, she yelled, her voice hoarse from all the screaming. Answer it and tell whoever it is that you are a complete fraud. Brad glared at her but reached into his pocket. He pulled out the sleek device and glanced at the caller ID. Whatever shred of anger was keeping him on his feet instantly evaporated. His eyes widened in absolute terror, and his hand began to shake so violently that he almost dropped the device on the marble floor. He swiped the screen to answer, lifting the phone to his ear. "Hello, Brad," whispered his voice, cracking into a dry wheeze. The room had gone so incredibly quiet that the frantic voice on the other end of the line was entirely audible to everyone standing nearby. It was Kevin, his tech startup co-founder and chief technology officer. And Kevin was not just panicked, he was weeping hysterically. "Brad, you have to get down here right now!" Kevin sobbed through the speaker, his voice high-pitched and breathless. "It is over, man. It is over. It is all over. They are tearing the place apart. Brad swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically around the room as if looking for an escape route that did not exist. Who is tearing the place apart? Kevin? Brad asked, his voice dropping to a desperate, terrified whisper. Who is at the office? Federal agents. Brad. Kevin screamed, the panic in his voice escalating. The lobby is full of them, men in windbreakers, the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI. They have a federal warrant, Brad. They are seizing everything. They are unplugging the server racks right now. They are boxing up the hard drives and taking every single financial file from the accounting department. The lead agent is throwing around words like wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. Eleanor let out a sharp gasp, taking a stumbling step backward until she hit the edge of the luxury sofa. She pressed a trembling hand over her mouth, realizing that taking stolen money from Brad might make her an accessory to a federal crime. Vanessa stood frozen, her arms wrapped tightly around her own stomach, listening to the destruction of her entire life, broadcasting live over a cell phone speaker. You have to tell them it was a mistake, Brad. Kevin pleaded, sobbing uncontrollably into the phone. They froze the corporate bank accounts. They froze my personal accounts. My wife is terrified. The lead agent told me they received a massive forensic data dump directly from Vanguard Holdings less than an hour ago. They know about the bot farms, Brad. They know about the offshore shell companies. They know about the missing $3 million. They are asking for you by name. They are bringing a team to your house next. The words hung in the cold air of the lavish living room. They are bringing a team to your house next. Brad did not reply. He could not reply. His brain simply short-circuited under the crushing weight of his absolute reality. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers. It fell, hitting the marble floor with a sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot. The screen shattered into a web of glowing glass. Kevin's hysterical sobbing continued to echo from the broken device as it lay face up on the ground, begging Brad to do something to fix a situation that was entirely unfixable. Brad swayed on his feet. His knees buckled, completely giving way under him. He collapsed onto the floor for the second time tonight, but this time there was no anger left in him. There was no arrogance. There was only the hollow, empty shell of a man who had built his entire identity on a mountain of lies and was now watching that mountain collapse directly on top of him. He curled inward, wrapping his arms around his knees and pressing his forehead against the cold stone floor. He began to rock back and forth, letting out a low, guttural moan of pure despair. It was the sound of a man watching the gates of federal prisons swing wide open to welcome him. Vanessa stared down at the pathetic, broken man on the floor. The husband she had bragged about, the tech genius she had used to belittle me all my life, was now reduced to a whimpering mess waiting for the FBI to arrive and place him in handcuffs. She did not kneel down to comfort him. She did not reach out to hold his hand. She just stood there, looking at him with absolute disgust and profound terror. I watched the scene unfold with Marcus standing firmly by my side. He had delivered exactly what he promised. Vanguard Holdings did not just decline a bad investment, they amputated a cancerous fraud from the financial ecosystem, and they did it with ruthless efficiency. The fake empire was completely dismantled, and the authorities were already on their way. The fake empire was completely dismantled, and the authorities were already on their way. Vanessa finally looked away from the pathetic shell of her husband and turned her frantic gaze toward me. The reality of her situation had completely obliterated whatever pride she had left. She was about to be homeless. Her assets were going to be seized by the federal government. She was going to be publicly humiliated and left with absolutely nothing. She scrambled across the floor, her expensive dress tearing slightly on a shard of broken crystal. She practically lunged at me, grabbing my arm with both of her trembling hands. Her acrylic nails dug desperately into my skin. "Zora, please, Vanessa," sobbed, her face completely smeared with ruined makeup. "You have to help me. You have to fix this." I looked down at her hands gripping my arm. I did not move. I did not flinch. I just stared at her, waiting for the inevitable toxic manipulation that had defined our entire relationship from the time we were children. You are a multimillionaire. Vanessa begged, her voice shrill and entirely hysterical. Your husband is a billionaire. You can afford to pay off Brad's debts. You have more money than you could ever spend. You can hire the best lawyers to keep him out of prison. Or just buy me a new house, Zora. Buy me a condo. Give me a monthly allowance so I do not have to live on the street. You cannot just walk away and leave me like this. We are sisters, Zora. We are blood. There it was. The ultimate manipulation tactic of every toxic family member. When their arrogance fails, when their cruelty backfires, and when they have absolutely nothing left to offer, they fall back on the biological accident of sharing the same parents. They expect biology to erase decades of abuse. I slowly reached down and peeled her fingers off my arm one by one. I stepped back, putting physical space between us. My expression remained entirely cold. We are blood, I repeated, letting the word hang heavily in the cold air of the living room. You love that word now, Vanessa. You love the idea of family loyalty, now that you are the one kneeling on the floor begging for salvation. But where was that blood loyalty when Mother stole my college fund to pay for your designer clothes? Where was that blood loyalty when you laughed at me for being single tonight in front of your wealthy friends? Where was that blood loyalty when you and Mother conspired to steal my identity and commit credit card fraud just 2 days ago? Vanessa choked on a sob, shaking her head frantically. That was different, she wept, tears streaming down her face. I was scared. I did not mean to hurt you, Zora. I am your sister. You are supposed to protect me. Family is supposed to stick together when things get hard. I am not supposed to protect my abuser. Vanessa, I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper that commanded the entire room. You have used our blood as a weapon my entire life. You used it to demand my money, my silence, and my submission. You used it to make me feel small so you could feel big. But blood does not give you a free pass to destroy my mental health. Blood does not give you the right to treat me like garbage and then expect me to open my wallet the second your fraudulent life collapses. Eleanor tried to step forward, her hands raised defensively, trying one last time to regain control. Zora, you are being too harsh, she pleaded, her voice shaking. She is your family. You cannot turn your back on your own flesh and blood. Do not speak to me. I snapped my gaze, locking onto my mother with such intensity that she instantly shrank back. You are not my family, Eleanor. You are the woman who birthed me. You are the woman who stood by and cheered while my sister tried to break my spirit. You are the woman who plotted to steal my name to save a criminal. You are a toxic parasite and nothing more. I turned my attention back to Vanessa, who was still weeping on the floor. Let me make this incredibly clear so there is no confusion moving forward. I announced, my voice steady and completely devoid of any sympathy. Blood makes you related, Vanessa. It is a simple biological fact. But loyalty is what makes you family. Respect is what makes you family. Showing up for someone without expecting to exploit them is what makes you family. And you have never once been my family. Vanessa let out a loud wail, burying her face in her hands as the finality of my words struck her. I am cutting the cord tonight, I continued, looking down at the 3 broken people before me. I am officially done carrying the weight of your toxicity. I am done being the punching bag for your deep insecurities. I will not pay for your lawyers, Brad. I will not buy you a condo, Vanessa, and I will not fund your retirement, Mother. You are entirely on your own. If any of you ever try to contact me, call me, email me, or show up at my properties, I will have you arrested for criminal harassment. I looked around the beautiful, massive living room that I legally owned. I looked at the shattered glass, the spilled wine, and the ruined lives scattered across the floor. This part of my life is permanently over, I said. The bridge is completely burned, and I am the one holding the match. I turned away from the 3 of them, refusing to grant them even one more second of my time. Marcus stepped forward and offered me his arm. I looped my hand through his, feeling the solid, reassuring warmth of his presence. Together we turned our backs on the absolute wreckage of my biological family and began walking toward the heavy custom oak front doors. We did not rush. We did not storm out in a fit of rage or emotional distress. We walked with the slow, measured pace of people who had just won a war they never started. Every step my heels took against the imported marble floors felt like a physical chain breaking and falling away from my body. The remaining party guests parted for us like the Red Sea. Nobody dared to speak to us. Nobody dared to offer empty apologies or awkward pleasantries. They simply pressed themselves against the walls and watched us leave, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sheer terror at the level of power they had just witnessed. Behind us, the screaming continued to escalate. I could hear Vanessa sobbing hysterically, demanding that Brad fix the situation immediately. I could hear Brad's voice cracking as he yelled back, telling her that their lives were completely over. Above both of their voices, Eleanor's shrill shrieks pierced the air as she demanded someone give her back her stolen retirement money. They were trapped in a hell of their own making, tearing each other to shreds because they had absolutely no one else left to blame. But their voices grew fainter with every step we took. When we finally reached the grand entryway, the valet manager rushed forward, trembling slightly, as he pulled the massive doors open for us. We stepped over the threshold and walked out into the crisp, freezing air of New Year's Eve. The sudden drop in temperature was sharp and entirely refreshing. It hit my face like a splash of cold water, washing away the suffocating tension and the stale scent of spilled champagne that had completely saturated the living room. The sky above was a brilliant clear black, dotted with the faint glittering light of a few distant stars. The manicured front lawn of the estate was quiet and perfectly still, completely untouched by the chaos happening just a few feet away inside the house. A sleek black Maybach was idling quietly at the base of the circular driveway. Our driver stood waiting, perfectly poised, holding the rear passenger door open for us. The warm amber glow from the interior of the luxury vehicle looked like a sanctuary. Marcus guided me down the stone steps, his hand resting protectively on the small of my back. He waited patiently by the open car door, letting me take my time. Before stepping into the vehicle, I stopped. I placed my hand on the cool metal frame of the car door and turned around to look back at the massive $4 million estate one last time. It was a beautiful property. The massive windows glowed with warm golden light, showcasing the sheer luxury that my holding company owned. I stood there in the freezing air and simply listened. Even through the thick, insulated glass of the custom windows, I could still hear the muffled, pathetic sounds of their fighting. The high-pitched wails and the aggressive shouting seeped through the walls of the mansion, like a toxic poison trying to escape a sealed jar. But it could not reach me anymore. The venom that had poisoned my childhood, the cruel words that had haunted my adolescence, and the financial manipulation that had plagued my adulthood were entirely locked inside that house. For 35 years I had carried the suffocating weight of their expectations and their constant rejection. I had spent my entire life trying to prove my worth to a mother who saw me as an obstacle and a sister who saw me as competition. I had allowed them to make me feel small because I desperately wanted a family. But standing in the driveway, listening to the absolute collapse of their fraudulent empire, I realized I did not need them. I never needed them. They needed me. They needed my light to hide their darkness. And now that I had officially taken my light away, they were completely lost in the dark. A profound, sweeping sense of freedom washed over my entire soul. My chest felt incredibly light. I took a deep breath of the freezing winter air, filling my lungs with the clean, crisp reality of my new life. I was completely safe. I was incredibly successful. And I was finally truly free. I turned away from the house and slid into the soft leather seat of the Maybach. Marcus climbed in right after me, and the driver gently closed the heavy door, shutting out the cold and the noise entirely. Marcus reached across the center console and took my hand, weaving his fingers tightly through mine. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice a low, comforting rumble in the quiet cabin of the car. I looked at my husband, feeling a genuine smile spread across my face. I have never been better, I replied. Let us go home. The Maybach glided smoothly down the long driveway, leaving the estate and the toxic wreckage of my past completely behind us in the dark. 3 months passed since that freezing New Year's Eve. 90 days of absolute silence from the people who had spent my entire life trying to tear me down. The peace that settled over my life was not just a temporary relief. It was a permanent, profound quiet that allowed me to finally breathe. I woke up every morning next to a man who truly loved me, and I spent my days building an empire that nobody could ever take away. But the universe has a very strict way of balancing the scales, and the fallout from that night was entirely catastrophic for the people I left behind. The news of Brad's spectacular downfall hit the financial blogs before the sun even rose on New Year's Day. The federal raid on his corporate office was swift, brutal, and entirely public. Agents carried out dozens of boxes filled with hard drives and fabricated ledger books. The $50 million deal with Vanguard Holdings was not just dead, it became the central piece of evidence in a massive federal indictment. Brad was arrested less than 48 hours after my eviction notice was served. He was charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and lying to federal investigators. Because he had zero actual assets and millions of dollars in outstanding debt, he could not even afford a decent defense attorney. He was assigned a public defender and is currently sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting a trial that will inevitably end with a very long prison sentence. His tech genius persona was completely erased from the internet, replaced by mugshots and brutal articles detailing how he scammed his own investors to pay for luxury sports cars. And speaking of my mother, her perfect retirement plan vanished right alongside Brad's imaginary wealth. Without the stolen funds from the tech company to subsidize her country club lifestyle, Eleanor was forced into a brutal reality check. The elite friends she had spent years trying to impress dropped her the second the FBI raid made the evening news. She became a social pariah overnight. But her ultimate punishment was not the loss of her wealthy friends. Her ultimate punishment was her new roommate. When the police arrived at my $4 million estate at 1 minute past midnight on New Year's Day, they did not give Vanessa time to negotiate. They stood in the grand entryway and watched as she dragged 2 suitcases of designer clothes out the front door, sobbing hysterically. With her credit cards frozen and her husband in federal custody, she had absolutely nowhere else to go. She was forced to move into Eleanor's cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The golden child and the narcissistic mother were finally trapped in a tiny space together without my money or Brad's fake status to act as a buffer. The result was a daily toxic explosion. I heard through mutual acquaintances that their relationship had entirely disintegrated. They engage in bitter screaming matches every single day. Eleanor blames Vanessa for choosing a criminal husband and ruining her retirement. Vanessa blames Eleanor for giving Brad her savings and pushing her into a lifestyle they could not afford. They are 2 miserable women drowning in their own resentment, desperately trying to drag each other down because they have no one else left to victimize. To make matters worse, the reality of poverty finally forced Vanessa to do something she had avoided her entire adult life. She had to get a job. The woman who once mocked me for managing private wealth and offered me a humiliating position as a receptionist is now working 40 hours a week as a retail associate at a mid-tier department store. She spends her days folding sweaters and standing on her feet dealing with the exact same public she used to look down upon. Every paycheck she earns goes directly to Eleanor just to cover the basic utilities of their cramped apartment. There are no more private chefs. There are no more Michelin star dinners. There is only the crushing weight of the ordinary life she always thought she was too good for. While their world completely imploded, my world expanded in ways I never thought possible. The scandal surrounding Brad's arrest actually brought a massive wave of high-profile clients to my wealth management firm. They saw how cleanly and efficiently Vanguard Holdings and Horizon LLC handled the fraudulent tech company, and they wanted that exact level of ruthless protection for their own assets. In the 3 months since that night, my real estate portfolio has entirely doubled. I acquired 6 new commercial properties and expanded Horizon LLC into an international market. Marcus and I are currently standing on the balcony of a penthouse we just purchased in London, looking out over the city skyline. The air is warm and the future is incredibly bright. I do not look back at the people I left in the dark. I do not feel guilt, and I do not feel regret. I only feel the solid weight of the empire I built with my own 2 hands and the unwavering support of the family I chose. Blood might make you related, but loyalty builds a legacy, and my legacy is just beginning. Fast forward to today. The cool London air has been replaced by the warm, salty breeze of the Mediterranean Sea. I am sitting on the sun-drenched teak deck of a private yacht holding a glass of crisp white wine. Marcus is sitting beside me, reading a financial report, but his hand is resting comfortably on my knee, grounding me in the present moment. The water around us is a brilliant sapphire blue stretching out infinitely toward the horizon, catching the golden light of the late afternoon sun. There are no sirens here. There are no frantic phone calls from creditors trying to collect on fraudulent debts. And most importantly, there are no screaming matches echoing down the hallway. There is only the gentle rhythmic sound of the waves lapping against the hull. People often look at my life now and assume that the money is what brought me peace. They look at the Maybach, the penthouse, and the real estate empire, and they think that financial security is the ultimate prize. I used to think the same thing when I was struggling to build my career while watching my sister flaunt her stolen lifestyle. But sitting here on this boat, I realize that the true definition of wealth has absolutely nothing to do with capital. The ultimate wealth is absolute unbothered peace. It is waking up in the morning and not having to brace yourself for an emotional attack. It is the profound luxury of a quiet mind and a safe home. My bank accounts have never been fuller, but the richest I have ever felt was the exact moment I walked out of that mansion and left my mother and sister in the wreckage of their own lies. Shedding toxic family members is the greatest investment you will ever make in your own life. The return on investment is your sanity, your self-worth, and your absolute freedom. Society constantly conditions us to tolerate abuse as long as it comes from someone who shares our last name. We are told to forgive and forget. We are pressured to keep the peace at family gatherings, even if it means going to war with our own mental health. You are handed this invisible script the day you are born that says you owe your parents your unquestioning obedience and you owe your siblings your endless grace. But that is a toxic lie designed to keep you trapped in a cycle of manipulation. You do not owe your abusers your future. You do not owe someone a seat at your table just because they happen to be in the same bloodline. If a stranger or a coworker treated you the way your toxic family treats you, you would have cut them off years ago. Biology is never an excuse for cruelty. When you finally draw that line in the sand, the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will inevitably call you selfish. They will call you bitter. They will launch smear campaigns and try to turn the rest of the world against you, just like Eleanor and Vanessa tried to do to me. Let them. Let them paint you as the villain in a story they ruined. Your peace is worth infinitely more than their approval. Setting a boundary is not an act of aggression. It is an act of radical self-preservation. When you finally close the door on the people who constantly tear you down, you create the necessary space for people who actually want to see you win. You create space for a partner who respects you. You create space for a life that you actually want to live, instead of a life you are constantly trying to survive. So, if you are listening to this right now and you are hesitating to block that phone number, or you are dreading the next holiday dinner, because you know the severe emotional toll it will take, please hear this. You have permission to walk away. You have the fundamental right to protect your peace. You are not a bad daughter, a bad son, or a bad sibling for refusing to be an emotional punching bag. You are simply a person who finally realized their own incredible value. The exact moment you stop shrinking to fit into their dysfunctional dynamic is the moment you start growing into the powerful person you were always meant to be. I want to hear from you now. This journey of walking away can feel incredibly lonely when you are in the middle of the storm, but I promise you are not alone. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to cut off a toxic family member? What was the final breaking point that made you realize you had to walk away? And more importantly, how has your life changed since you reclaimed your peace and your power? Drop your stories in the comments below. Let us build a community of people who chose themselves over toxic loyalty. Share your experiences because your survival story might be the exact motivation someone else needs to finally walk out their own front door. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Stay strong, protect your peace, and never apologize for knowing your worth. The most profound takeaway from Zora's journey is that biological ties do not obligate you to endure psychological abuse. Society often pushes the narrative that family is everything, conditioning us to tolerate manipulation, disrespect, and cruelty simply because we share genetics with our abusers. Zora's story shatters this dangerous myth, teaching us that blood merely makes you related, but consistent respect, care, and loyalty are what actually make you family. Walking away from toxic relatives is rarely easy. It requires confronting the deep guilt instilled by years of gaslighting and accepting that you will likely be painted as the villain in their false narrative. Eleanor, Vanessa, and Brad built their fragile egos by using Zora as a permanent scapegoat. When she finally reclaimed her power and enforced her legal and emotional boundaries, their entire parasitic system collapsed. This perfectly illustrates a vital truth: when you stop shrinking to accommodate dysfunction, you strip toxic people of their power over you. Setting these boundaries is never an act of malice. It is a necessary act of radical self-preservation. Ultimately, this narrative highlights that true wealth is not defined by designer clothes, rented mansions, or elite social status, built on a mountain of lies. The highest, most sustainable form of wealth is absolute unbothered peace. It is the quiet freedom of waking up in a safe, loving environment, surrounded only by people who actively celebrate your light instead of trying to extinguish it to hide their own darkness. You owe yourself the profound luxury of that peace, even if it means permanently leaving certain people behind in the wreckage of their own making. Evaluate the relationships in your own life today, and take the brave step of setting firm boundaries with anyone who consistently drains your peace.